They called him the miracle surgeon, not as a title, not as a professional designation printed on a hospital directory or embroidered on a white coat. As a truth that the families of Seoul had arrived at independently over many years through the accumulated evidence of impossible outcomes that had somehow, under his hands, become possible. Mothers whispered his name in waiting rooms, the way people whisper prayers, with the particular quality of someone who has run out of every other available option and has arrived at the place where hope and desperation occupy the same breath. He had saved more hearts than anyone else in the city. He had stood at operating tables for 12, 14, 16 hours at a time and emerged with the steady composure of someone for whom the impossible was simply the work that needed doing. He was brilliant. He was disciplined. He was, by every measurable account, the kind of physician that a medical career of 40 years might produce once, if it was very fortunate. And every evening, after saving another life, he drove home to an apartment so quiet you could hear the kitchen clock. No one waiting, no dinner on the table, no voice calling from another room to ask how the day had been. Just the clock, and the dark, and the specific weight of a man who had given everything he had to everyone else, and had arrived home to find nothing waiting for him in the space where his own life was supposed to be. I did not know any of this when I arrived at Seoul National University Hospital on a Tuesday morning in October with a sketchbook under my arm and a suitcase that was slightly too heavy because I had packed more art supplies than clothing. I had come to help children heal. I had absolutely no idea that the first heart I would begin to reach was not a child's at all. It belonged to the man everyone in that hospital believed needed nothing from anyone. Let me tell you about the hospital first, because a place shapes the people inside it. And Seoul National University Hospital had been shaping people for long enough that its character was unmistakable from the first morning you walked through its doors. It was large in the way that serious institutions are large, not ostentatious, purposeful, the kind of building that had been designed around the requirements of what happened inside it, rather than around how it appeared from the outside. The corridors moved with the particular urgency of a place where time is genuinely weighted. Doctors walked with the focused forward motion of people who have 17 things requiring their attention simultaneously and have learned to prioritize with a speed that would unsettle anyone watching from the outside. Nurses communicated with the economy of people who have refined their professional language to its most essential elements, because every unnecessary word costs something. Families occupied the waiting areas with the patient, suspended dread of people whose lives had been reorganized around an outcome they could not control and could only wait for. And children in the pediatric ward, who had arrived in this place through no choice of their own, and who were navigating the specific bewilderment of a young person confronting illness before they have the vocabulary or the life experience to make sense of it. It was for those children that I had come. My name is Imani Mensah, 31 years old. Born in Kumasi, Ghana, raised partly there and partly in Nairobi, where my father's academic career had taken our family when I was 9. I am a pediatric art therapist, which is a profession that requires me to explain itself at most social gatherings, because people are not always certain what it means. What it means is this: children who are ill or frightened or processing something that exceeds their current capacity to understand in words, often find that they can access what they are carrying through other channels, through color and line, through story and song, through the particular freedom of making something with their hands in a space where there are no wrong answers and no performance required. My work is to create that space, to sit beside a child with a paintbrush or a piece of clay or a stack of colored paper and allow them to show me what they cannot yet say. It is quiet work. It is patient work. It is the kind of work that people who value visible results sometimes struggle to take seriously because its outcomes are not always measurable in the language of charts and clinical improvement percentages. But the children know, and their families know, and I had spent 6 years knowing it too, which was why when the invitation arrived from the International Children's Healing Program partnered with this hospital, I had accepted with the particular gladness of someone being offered the chance to do what they love in a context large enough to show what it is genuinely capable of. I first saw Dr. Kang Ji-hoon from a distance. He was crossing the main corridor of the hospital at a pace that was not fast, but that covered ground with extraordinary efficiency. He was wearing his white coat over dark scrubs, a stethoscope around his neck in the way that surgeons wear them, present but not performative. Tall, a face that was composed in the way of someone who has trained their expression over many years to communicate only what they intended to communicate. He did not look at anyone as he passed, not from arrogance. I registered this immediately, from the interior focus of someone whose attention was already fully committed to wherever they were going and could not afford to distribute what remained of it along the way. A nurse near me noticed me watching him. "Dr. Kang," she said, as if the name was its own complete sentence, as if no further information was required. "He operates today," I said. "He operates most days," she said, and returned to her work. The children's ward was at the end of the east wing. I had been given a room within it that had good natural light from a south-facing window and enough floor space for the materials I required and the movement that genuine art sessions with multiple children demanded. I spent my first 2 days arranging it. Laying out materials in the way I had learned produced the most immediate relaxation in children encountering the space for the first time. Colors accessible without requiring permission to access them. Paper in generous quantities so that the act of using it never felt like a consumption of something limited. A small record player in the corner, because music, in my experience, creates an atmosphere that makes every other form of expression easier. By the 3rd day, the children had found me. They arrived with the cautious curiosity of people who have been in a hospital long enough to have developed a healthy skepticism toward new things, but who are also bored enough and young enough and fundamentally hopeful enough to investigate anyway. Within 40 minutes of the first session, the room had filled with noise and color and the particular organized chaos of children who have been given permission to make something. Some of the medical staff walking past the open door stopped and looked in with expressions that ranged from surprised warmth to politely maintained skepticism. I was familiar with both responses. I continued the session. Have you ever met someone who smiled for everyone else, but looked completely alone when no one was watching? I began noticing Dr. Ji-hoon in the children's ward toward the end of my first week. He came through the ward on his rounds, with the focused professionalism of a man conducting a clinical assessment. He checked charts. He spoke with nurses. He examined the children in his care with the particular combination of thoroughness and gentleness that serious pediatric medicine requires, because children are not simply small adults, and their bodies and their fears respond to different handling than adult patients. The children responded to him immediately, not with the careful politeness of young people managing an authority figure, with the genuine, relaxed delight of children who have decided someone is safe. They showed him drawings. They told him stories. A boy named Jun Seo, 7 years old, recovering from a procedure that had kept him in the ward for 3 weeks, had developed the habit of saving his best artwork to show Dr. Ji-hoon on rounds. Dr. Ji-hoon looked at everything presented to him with genuine attention. He asked questions, real questions, not the performed interest of a busy adult managing a child's need for acknowledgement, but the actual questions of someone who wanted to know what the drawing was of, and why the house had 3 chimneys, and whether the dog in the corner was the child's own dog at home. And then, when the child had received the full quality of his attention and had turned satisfied back to their activity, he would complete his clinical work and leave. Always before the thank yous. Always before the moment when the interaction might have become something more than professional. I noticed this pattern in the 2nd week, and I found myself sitting with a question I could not entirely put down. Why does someone who saves so many lives always leave before he is thanked for it? The hospital garden was a contained rectangle of green on the east side of the building, accessible from the ground floor through a pair of glass doors that most of the medical staff passed without using during working hours, because working hours at this hospital did not often permit the luxury of sitting outside. On a Thursday evening in my 2nd week, I had stayed late to prepare materials for the following morning's sessions. When I finally gathered my things and made my way toward the exit, I passed the glass doors of the garden and looked through out of the habit of someone who has learned that gardens at dusk have a quality of light worth pausing for. He was there, sitting on a bench at the far end of the garden, still in his white coat, a paper coffee cup on the bench beside him that had clearly been there long enough to be cold. He was not looking at anything, not his phone, not a document, not the garden itself, though the garden in that particular evening light was genuinely worth looking at. He was simply sitting, with the quality of exhaustion that is not physical, the kind that accumulates from the inside and that no amount of rest entirely addresses, because its source is not in the body, but in something carried considerably deeper than the body. He did not look like the miracle surgeon in that moment. He did not look like the physician that families prayed for by name. He looked like a man who had given everything he had to the day, and every day before it, and had arrived at this bench in this garden at this hour with nothing remaining that he knew how to give to himself. I did not announce myself. I walked to the exit. But I carried that image with me through the rest of the evening and into the following morning in the way you carry something that has landed with more weight than you were prepared for. And I understood that the question I had been sitting with had not become smaller. It had become considerably larger. The crossing of paths became a pattern without either of us designing it. The hospital was large enough that 2 people could have occupied it for months without their schedules intersecting in any meaningful way. the children's ward and the cardiothoracic surgical unit were not natural adjacencies. And yet, he came through the children's ward on his rounds at roughly the same hour each morning. I arrived to prepare my sessions at roughly the same hour. The corridor outside the art room became a place where we nodded to each other in the morning and exchanged the brief functional exchanges of two professionals sharing an environment. He asked me once in passing what I was teaching the children that morning. I told him we were working with watercolor because the quality of watercolor, the way it moves without being entirely controlled, tends to be useful for children who are carrying anxiety because it externalizes the feeling of things being slightly outside your grip and makes it something you can observe rather than something that is happening to you invisibly. He stopped walking. He looked at me with the quality of someone who has heard something that requires more attention than a corridor exchange permits. That is, he said, choosing his words with the care of someone who does not deploy them carelessly, a genuinely intelligent observation. Thank you, I said. He continued down the corridor, and I went into the art room and spent the next several minutes being more pleased about that exchange than was entirely proportionate. I noticed the meals, or rather, I noticed the absence of them. He operated on a schedule that would have dismantled most people's relationship with food entirely. The surgical days were long. The consultation hours between procedures were used for documentation and review, rather than for the ordinary requirements of a human body that needed fuel to continue functioning at the level being asked of it. The hospital cafeteria staff knew his order. They also knew from long experience that the order placed at 7 in the morning had approximately a 40% chance of being collected before it stopped being worth eating. I made food on a Sunday, not from a plan. I had been cooking for myself in the apartment the program had arranged, and I had made more than I needed in the way that cooking for one tends to produce when you are someone who learned to cook in a household of 6. I brought the extra to the hospital on Monday morning and left it at the nursing station near the surgical unit with a note. You save everyone else. Please remember to take care of yourself too. I did not sign it. I was not entirely certain he would know who it was from, and I was comfortable with the ambiguity. The following morning the container was on my desk outside the art room, cleaned, returned without comment. I made food again the following Sunday. It came back again the following Tuesday. We did not speak about this arrangement. It simply continued. A form of communication that required no language and apparently suited both of us entirely. The children adored him in the way that children adore adults who take them seriously without condescension. They had developed various strategies for extending his time in the ward beyond what his round schedule technically permitted. Junseo had perfected the art of having a question ready that required a slightly longer answer than a yes or no. A small girl named Hana, 5 years old and recovering with the astonishing resilience of children who have not yet learned to doubt their own capacity to recover, had discovered that holding up a drawing and asking him to explain what he saw in it tended to keep him at her bedside for an additional several minutes. He allowed all of these strategies without appearing to notice them, which meant he noticed them and chose to be available to them anyway. I watched this with growing attention. One afternoon I was working with a group of older children on a collaborative mural project when he came through on his rounds. He completed his clinical work with his usual focused efficiency and was moving toward the door when Jun Seo called out from his bed. "Dr. Kang, come and see what we are making." He stopped. He came to see what they were making. He studied the mural with the quality of someone who genuinely wanted to understand it. He asked Jun Seo about the section he had painted. He asked another child about the color she had chosen and why. And then he glanced across the room at me. I was watching him. He held my gaze for a moment, and then he looked back at the mural. "It is very good," he said to the children, and left. I returned to my work, but the image of that glance sat with me for the rest of the afternoon, in a way I was not entirely certain what to do with. The photograph was an accident. I had been asked to use the small consultation room adjacent to the children's ward for a one-on-one session with a child whose anxiety made group sessions difficult. The room was not regularly used for anything else, and the nursing staff had cleared it for my purpose. I arrived early to arrange the materials and found the room as I had expected. A table, 2 chairs, a window, a small bookcase along one wall, and on the desk, which had apparently been used by Dr. Ji-hoon for documentation between consultations and had not been cleared, a framed photograph. It was not hidden, it was not displayed. It occupied the desk the way objects occupy surfaces when they have been placed there without particular decision, present through habit rather than intention. A young woman, perhaps 25 in the photograph, Korean. A face that carried a resemblance to Dr. Ji-hoon in the line of the jaw and the quality of the eyes that was unmistakable once you had looked at it for more than a moment. Laughing. The specific full laugh of someone who is genuinely amused and has not yet learned to manage their own delight for the benefit of an audience. I was looking at the photograph when he came into the room. His eyes went to the desk immediately. He crossed to it without rushing, picked up the photograph, placed it face down in the desk drawer, closed the drawer. He looked at me. I looked at him. "I apologize for using the room," he said. "I was not aware it had been arranged for a session." "Please do not apologize," I said. "I can move to another space." "No," he said. "I am finished here." He picked up the documents he had come for and left. I stood in that room for a moment with the lingering image of the photograph and the way his face had looked when he saw me looking at it. Not angry, not guarded in the way of someone protecting a secret. Something older than that. Something that had been living with its own weight for long enough that the weight had become simply the condition of how he moved through the world. The question came from the least expected source. A child named Soo-yeon, 8 years old, the kind of 8-year-old who has processed sufficient difficulty to have acquired a quality of directness that bypasses the ordinary social negotiations that adults develop and maintain. She had been in the ward for 6 weeks. She was recovering well. She was also in the particular way of children who are observant and unfiltered, paying close attention to the adults around her, and arriving at conclusions she saw no reason to keep to herself. Dr. Ji-hoon had completed his assessment of her one morning and was writing his notes when Soo-yeon, who had been watching him with the focused attention of a small scientist observing a phenomenon, asked, "Doctor, who waits for you when you go home?" The pen stopped moving. The silence that followed was brief, but it had a weight that I registered from across the room where I was preparing the afternoon's materials. He looked at her, and for a moment, beneath the composed professional surface, something entirely unmanaged moved across his face. He recovered. "I should check on the patient in room 7, he said, and left. Suyeon watched him go, then turned to me. "He didn't answer," she said. "No," I said. "That means the answer is sad," she said, with the particular matter-of-fact clarity of a child who has not yet learned that some truths are considered better handled with more delicacy. I looked at the door he had gone through. "Sometimes," I said, "yes. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones carrying the heaviest silence." I had understood this in a general sense for most of my professional life. My work placed me consistently in the company of children who had learned from very early to present a manageable version of themselves to the adults around them while carrying something considerably heavier in their interior. I recognized the same quality in Dr. Ji-hoon, the same careful distance between what was visible on the surface and what was being managed below it. The difference was that children who carry this weight do so without the full range of tools that adult experience provides for the management. They leak through drawings and stories and the particular behavioral signals that a trained eye learns to read. Adults manage more efficiently, but they still leak, if you know how to look. It was raining on the afternoon, he finally told me. Not dramatically. A quiet Thursday afternoon rain that made the hospital windows run with water and reduced the Seoul streets outside to soft blurred amber and grey. I had stayed after the last session to write notes. He had apparently stayed after the last consultation for the same reason. We encountered each other in the small kitchen, adjacent to the children's ward, where the staff kept a kettle and the kind of tea that people drink at the end of long days. He was making coffee, looking at it with the expression of someone who has made this coffee as a reflex, rather than because they actually want it. "You are going to forget it again," I said. He looked at me. "Almost certainly," he said. I made tea for myself and he did not leave, and I did not leave, and we stood for a moment in the kitchen with the rain on the windows and the sounds of the hospital going about its evening around us. "The photograph," he said, not as a beginning, as if the sentence had been sitting waiting and had finally decided to move. I waited. "My sister," he said. I held the cup of tea in both hands and said nothing. "Her name was Ji-yeon," he said. "She was 26. She was a musician. She played the cello with the specific combination of technical precision and emotional recklessness that serious music sometimes produces in people who feel everything very deeply and have found an instrument equal to that depth." He looked at the window. She had a congenital heart condition that we had managed for most of her life. It was monitored. It was stable. We believed we understood its parameters. The rain continued its quiet work on the glass. "I was in Geneva," he said, "an international cardiology conference. I was presenting research. The kind of professional engagement that requires months of preparation and represents, by the measurements of a medical career, a significant opportunity." He stopped. "She had an acute episode, unexpected. The parameters we believed we understood turned out to be less understood than we had believed." The silence that followed this sentence was the longest of the conversation. "The surgeon who operated was excellent," he said. "I need you to understand this. The outcome was not a consequence of insufficient skill or insufficient care. Sometimes a heart has made a decision that no intervention can fully reverse. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. She died on a Tuesday afternoon while I was on a stage in Geneva, explaining to an audience of cardiologists how to preserve cardiac function under conditions of extreme physiological stress. He set the cup down. I have performed 11,000 procedures since that Tuesday, he said. I have not lost a patient on the table in 4 years. I work until I am no longer capable of working, and then I work some more. He looked at me. And it has not once been enough to answer the question that Tuesday morning left me with. I looked at this man who had spent years saving everyone he could reach, because the one person he had not been present to save was the absence at the center of his entire life. And I understood something about the garden at dusk, and the cold coffee, and leaving before the thank yous, and going home alone to the sound of a kitchen clock. He was not punishing himself with the work. He was trying to fill a space that the work was never actually going to fill, no matter how many hearts it saved, because the space was not a professional one. It was the shape of his sister. And no surgery had ever been designed for that. I did not offer him comfort in the form of easy words. I had learned through years of sitting beside children carrying things that were too large for their years, that the offer of easy words at a moment of genuine pain is a comfort primarily for the person offering them, rather than for the person receiving them. I said, "Thank you for telling me." He looked at me. "That is all," he said. "For now," I said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Most people," he said, "when I have come this close to this conversation, begin telling me that she would want me to be happy, or that I have honored her memory through my work, or that time heals." "Those things may all be true," I said, "but they are not what you need right now." "What do I need right now?" he said. "To have told someone," I said, "and to have that person receive it without immediately trying to resolve it." He was very still. "That is a surprisingly precise thing to offer," he said. "It is my work," I said, "in a different context." He almost smiled, not the managed almost smile I had observed occasionally in the corridors. Something younger than that. Something that had not yet been fully organized by years of emotional discipline. "Imani," he said, using my name for the first time, with the quality of someone testing whether the name fits the conversation they are currently inside. "Yes," I said. "I am going to drink this coffee," he said, "even though it is not good." "It is genuinely not good," I said. "No," he said, "but I made it." And we stood in the small kitchen with the rain on the windows and the evening hospital sounds around us, and drank our respective hot beverages without saying anything further. And somehow that was precisely the right thing. Something shifted after that evening, not immediately, not in any way that announced itself or required acknowledgement. But the quality of how he moved through his days changed in ways that the hospital registered before he appeared to register them himself. He ate lunch, not every day, but often enough that the cafeteria staff, who had developed a resigned acceptance of his order being placed and not collected, began to notice with the cautious surprise of people who have stopped expecting something and then receive it. He left work before midnight on 2 occasions in the same week. The nursing staff on the night shift, who had grown accustomed to seeing his office light on when they arrived and still on when they left, mentioned this to each other with the gentle bewilderment of people encountering a small, unexpected deviation in a pattern they had believed to be fixed. He began stopping at the art room doorway in the mornings, not to complete his rounds, but simply to observe the sessions for a few minutes before continuing. I noticed this and did not comment on it, because I understood it was its own form of the thing the children found in the art room. The permission to simply watch something gentle happening without being required to participate or perform. And occasionally in the corridors, he would pause when we crossed paths. Not for long, but long enough for a conversation that was not about the hospital or the children or anything functional at all. Just two people briefly, in the middle of a busy place, talking about something that mattered. Spring arrived at the hospital in the particular way that spring arrives at places built around difficulty. Not triumphantly, gently. The way light changes in a room when someone opens a window that has been closed for a long time. A gradual warming, the quality of the air becoming something that you register with the specific gratitude of someone who had stopped noticing what the air felt like and has been reminded. The children's healing program had reached its 6-month mark. The results were not invisible. The nursing staff had begun requesting that certain children be included in the art sessions when they noticed behavioral signals that their clinical training had taught them to recognize. Some of the more resistant physicians had become quietly supportive, not through converted enthusiasm, but through the evidence of children who were eating better and sleeping better and communicating with their families with more ease. And Dr. Ji-hoon had started attending the sessions, not as an observer from the doorway. Inside, seated, with the quality of uncertainty that belongs to someone entering a room that does not operate by rules they know. The children, who had been aware for some time of the existence of a particular warmth between Dr. Ji-hoon and the person who ran the art room, received his presence with the specific delight of people watching something they had been quietly hoping for finally happening. Jun Seo, who had by this point recovered sufficiently to be close to discharge, and who had developed in the interim a cheerful proprietorial relationship with both of us, placed a brush in Dr. Ji-hoon's hand on his first day with the authority of someone who has decided a decision has been made and is now being implemented. "Paint something," Jun Seo said. "I do not know how to paint," Dr. Ji-hoon said. "Nobody knows how to paint," Jun Seo said. "That is not the point." Dr. Ji-hoon looked at the brush, then at the paper, then at Jun Seo. "What is the point?" he said. "Making something," Jun Seo said, with the patience of someone explaining something obvious to an adult who has temporarily forgotten how to be uncomplicated about things. Dr. Ji-hoon dipped the brush, and he painted. What he painted was not technically accomplished. It was the painting of someone who has not held a brush since childhood, and whose hand knows how to perform extraordinary precision in a surgical context, and is currently discovering that this knowledge does not transfer. But he painted, and somewhere in the middle of painting something blue in the upper left corner of the paper, something happened in his face that I had not seen there before. A release. The almost imperceptible release of something that had been held at a particular tension for a very long time and had been given, in this unlikely context, permission to soften. He looked up from the paper. The children around him were absorbed in their own work. He looked at me. I looked at him. Neither of us said anything. But the children noticed, in the way children always notice what the adults in a room are trying not to show, and someone giggled. And then Dr. Kang Ji-hoon laughed, really laughed. The full, unguarded, entirely unmanaged laugh of someone who has not used that mechanism in years and has just been reminded, to their own evident surprise, that it still exists in them. The children laughed with him, and the art room filled with a sound that I thought about for a long time afterward, the sound of someone returning to themselves. He came to find me on a Saturday morning, not at the hospital, at the small park near the apartment the program had arranged, where I had developed the habit of walking on weekends with a coffee and my notebook in the particular free time that a demanding work week makes feel like a genuine luxury. He was wearing ordinary clothes, dark trousers, a grey sweater. Without the white coat, he looked like himself in a way that the professional environment sometimes made harder to access. "I'm going to visit her memorial today," he said. "I have not been in 2 years." I looked at him. "I wondered," he said, with the careful quality of someone who has rehearsed this and is still uncertain how it will land, "whether you might come." "Yes," I said. He looked slightly surprised by the absence of hesitation. "I will not be good company," he said. "You are not required to be any particular kind of company," I said. "I am simply coming." We went. The memorial was in a quiet part of the city, a place of unhurried paths and the particular quality of silence that cemeteries in cities carry, the silence of a contained world operating at a different pace from everything surrounding it. He stood at his sister's memorial for a long time. I stood beside him. I did not speak. He did not speak for most of it. At one point he crouched down and placed his hand on the stone with the gentleness of someone touching something irreplaceable. And then he stood, and we walked back through the quiet paths. And somewhere in the walking he said, "I have understood for a long time, intellectually, that grief is not a problem to be solved." He looked at the path. "But I have been trying to solve it anyway, with every surgery, every outcome, every family I did not have to deliver terrible news to." He was quiet for a moment. "The work is real," he said. "What it means is real. But it was also, for a long time, the way I avoided the part of grief that has nothing to do with work." He looked at me. "The part that simply needs to be sat with." "Yes," I said. "You are very good at sitting with things," he said. "It is my work," I said, "in all contexts." He almost smiled, and we walked in the quiet of a city on a Saturday morning, and I thought about all the ways a person can be present for someone without the presence requiring anything of either of them beyond the willingness to simply be there. And I thought about how rare that willingness actually is, and how much it matters. The feelings became difficult to ignore by the time summer arrived. Not difficult in the sense of unwanted, difficult in the sense of too large for the container that two careful adults had been maintaining around them, with the mutual, unspoken, entirely understood agreement that whatever was growing between them would be treated with the respect it deserved, rather than rushed toward its destination. The children had no such restraint. Soo-yeon, who had been discharged and readmitted for a follow-up procedure, and who had returned to the ward with her observations entirely intact, informed me one morning with the directness of a small person who considers social ambiguity a waste of everyone's time, that Dr. Ji-hoon was noticeably different on the days I was in the ward than on the days I was not. "He smiles more," she said, "when you are here." "Dr. Ji-hoon smiles," I said. "Not like that," she said, with the specific authority of a child who has made a study of the subject and considers her conclusion well supported. I did not argue with her, because she was not wrong. One of the senior surgeons, a woman named Dr. O, who had known Ji-hoon for the full length of his career at this hospital, and who watched the gradual changes in his daily patterns with the particular attention of someone who had been concerned about him for years and was cautiously reassured by what she was seeing, stopped me in the corridor one afternoon. "Whatever you are doing," she said without preamble, "continue doing it." "I am running art sessions with the children," I said. She looked at me with the expression of someone who is accustomed to precision and has no time for performed innocence. "Yes," she said, "among other things," and continued down the corridor. The Children's Healing and Arts Centre opened on a Friday in autumn. Ji-hoon had been involved in the proposal for its establishment from the point where it became clear that the program's outcomes warranted a permanent structure. He had navigated the hospital administration with the calm authority of someone who understands institutional systems and has learned how to move things through them without unnecessary friction. What I did not know until the opening ceremony was that the centre had been named. Not after a donor, not after an institutional benefactor. The Kang Ji-yeon Children's Healing Centre, after his sister. He told me this when he handed me the directorship appointment letter. Formal, on hospital letterhead. My name above a role I had not expected to be offered, and that I received with the particular quality of gladness that arrives when something you have worked toward with genuine investment is recognized as having been worth working toward. "You built this," he said. "It should carry your name as director, but it needed a name that meant something." He looked at the plaque on the wall of the new centre. "She would have loved it," he said quietly. I looked at him. "I believe she would have loved you," I said. He turned to me, and the expression on his face in that moment was not the composed professional surface or the managed emotional discipline, or any of the carefully maintained versions of himself that the hospital had known for years. It was simply him, the actual person that all of those versions had been constructed around. "I think," he said carefully, "that I would like to show you something this evening." "What?" I said. "The rooftop," he said. "The garden up there. I had it restructured as part of the renovation. I want to know whether it is what it should be." "You are asking a pediatric art therapist to evaluate your rooftop garden," I said. "I am asking the person whose judgment I trust most," he said, "in all areas." The rooftop garden was everything the best rooftop gardens in cities are. An argument for the existence of quiet above the noise, a space that holds its breath at the right moments and exhales the city skyline at you in a way that makes the city feel both enormous and manageable. Seoul in the autumn evening, the lights coming on as the sky moved through its stages, the particular quality of a city beginning its nighttime version of itself. He stood at the railing looking at it. "For years," he said, "I measured a day by what I had accomplished inside an operating room." He looked at the city. Whether I had done enough, whether the outcome had been worth the hours, whether the next day would require something I was not certain I still had available. He turned from the railing. "And then you came to this hospital with a sketchbook and a warm smile, and the habit of noticing the people everyone else walked past." He looked at me. "And you noticed me?" "Yes," I said. "Not the surgeon," he said. "Not the reputation, not the outcomes or the career or any of the things that everyone here sees when they see me." "No," I said. "You noticed a man sitting alone on a bench in a hospital garden after dark with cold coffee," he said. "Yes," I said. "And you did not try to fix it," he said. You simply registered it, and came back the next day, and the day after. The city continued its evening work below us. I have been thinking, he said, about what it means to be genuinely seen by another person. He reached into his coat pocket. Not observed, not assessed, not evaluated for what you represent professionally or what your history has made of you. He held something in his hand, seen as the actual person, with the grief and the cold coffee and the empty apartment, and the sister whose laugh I have not heard in 4 years, and the slow, uncertain, entirely uncharacteristic process of learning how to be a human being in the world again, rather than simply a surgeon. He looked at the thing in his hand, and then at me. You did that, he said. You simply, patiently, without asking anything in return, did that. He opened his hand. A ring. Simple. Considered. The choice of someone who understands that the most meaningful things do not require elaboration. I do not want another evening to end in an empty apartment, he said. I have had enough of those evenings to last considerably longer than I intend to live. He looked at me. I want to build a life that has something in it worth coming home to. Something real and warm and mine, not by inheritance or professional obligation, but by genuine choice. He held the ring toward me. Will you build it with me? I looked at him. At this man who had arrived in my life as a question I could not put down and had become, across the most unhurried and genuine months of my adult life, the clearest answer I had ever received to anything. Yes, I said. He exhaled. The way you exhale when something you have been holding very carefully for a very long time has been received by the right hands and can finally be set down. He placed the ring on my finger, and we stood on the rooftop above Seoul, with the city lights arranging themselves across the horizon, and the autumn air cool and clear, and the entire enormous ordinary world continuing below us. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The wedding was held in the hospital healing garden the following spring. The garden that had been redesigned as part of the center's development. The same garden where I had once looked through a window at night and seen a man sitting alone on a bench with cold coffee, looking at nothing. The children came, the ones who had been discharged, the ones who had recovered, the ones who had sat in the art room and shown me what they were carrying through color and line, and the particular brave vulnerability of a child who has decided to trust someone with the truth of what they feel. Junseo, now entirely recovered, and of the opinion that this wedding was at least partly his accomplishment, arrived with his parents and a drawing he had made specifically for the occasion. He presented it to us with the ceremony of someone delivering a significant artistic work to its intended recipients. It showed 2 figures, one tall, one slightly shorter, standing on a rooftop, the city in the background rendered in the colors of a child who has approached the Seoul skyline without reference to what colors Seoul actually is, which meant it was considerably more vivid than reality. Beneath the figures, in the careful handwriting of a 7-year-old who had recently become extremely interested in the act of writing things down, he had written, "They found each other." Suyeon came with her mother and delivered a brief but authoritative assessment of the floral arrangements that confirmed her taste remained impeccable and her opinions unfiltered. Dr. O stood near the garden entrance in the particular posture of someone who has been watching something from a careful distance for a long time, and has arrived at a position from which the view is finally, fully satisfying. The senior surgeon who had mentored Ji-hoon from his earliest days at the hospital, a man of great age and greater professional wisdom, sat in the front row and watched the ceremony with the expression of someone assembling a full picture from pieces he has been observing separately for years. Afterward, he found Ji-hoon in the garden and held his hand for a long moment. "I have watched you save thousands of hearts," he said. He looked at the garden around them, at the families and the children and the nurses and the patients, and the person standing on the other side of the garden, talking to Jun Seo with the warm patience that was her fundamental nature. "But today," he said, "I believe you finally found your own." Life has a way of arranging the meetings that matter most in the places and moments you would not have thought to choose. I arrived at a hospital in Seoul to help children process their fear through color and story and the quiet freedom of making something with their hands. I did not arrive to meet a surgeon who had been saving other people's hearts for years while quietly neglecting his own. But that is what happened, and what I have understood in the years since is that the arrival was not accidental, not in any supernatural sense, not because anything outside of ordinary human experience arranged it, but because two people who had both learned through different paths to show up fully for the people in front of them eventually showed up fully for each other. And the showing up, it turned out, was the whole thing. The greatest operation Dr. Kang Ji-hoon ever performed did not take place in an operating room. It took place across the most unhurried months of his adult life, in a hospital garden and a small kitchen with rain on the windows and a rooftop above a city of lights, during which he carefully, patiently, with all the discipline and precision he had spent his career developing, opened himself to something he had not known how to attempt before. The operation of learning to live again. And it was, by every measure I know how to use, a complete success. Have you ever watched someone give everything they have to the world around them and wondered whether anyone was giving anything back to them? Have you ever been that person, the one everyone turns to, the one who holds things together for everyone else, the one who arrives home to the quiet and tells yourself the quiet is fine and the work is enough? This story was for you. Dr. Kang Ji-hoon spent years believing that the value of a life was measured in what it produced for others. He was not wrong exactly. The work mattered. Every heart he saved mattered in ways that cannot be overstated. But a life cannot be sustained on output alone. It requires, at some point, the willingness to receive something, to allow someone to sit beside you in a garden at dusk and not require you to be strong, to accept a container of home-cooked food, returned without comment, as the language it actually is, to let yourself be seen, not the professional version of yourself, the actual one, with the grief and the cold coffee and the years of carrying something alone that was never meant to be carried alone. That is not weakness. That is the bravest thing a person can do. And if this story reminded you of that in any form, if it reached something in you that recognized what it is to be the person everyone relies on, who has never fully learned to rely on anyone in return, then it did what it was made to do. Thank you for being here for all of it, for staying through the garden at dusk and the kitchen with rain on the windows, and the art room full of children, and the rooftop above a city of lights. If this story sat with you after it ended, subscribe, because there are more stories where this one came from. Stories about the people who hold everyone else up, and what happens when someone finally holds them. about the healers who needed healing, about the extraordinary, unremarkable miracle of two people who chose each other slowly, honestly, and with the full weight of who they actually were. New stories every week. I will be here.